where it says perspectives on trans folks participating in sports?
Yes.
Amazing. Okay, so who am I? I said my name is Grace Popola. So you might be asking why I'm here today to talk about this subject. So you might say to yourself, well, is she here because she's transgender? I'm actually not, so that's not why I'm here. Am I a scientist? No. I'm a science teacher, but I'm not a scientist. Am I an athlete? No. Actually, my claim to athletic fame is that they once had to stop an entire swim meet because they thought I had drowned. And actually, no, I was fine. I had just gone to the bottom of the pool and was pretending to be a mermaid. So that's not why I'm here. So am I a dweeb who went viral? Yes, that's why I'm here. That is who I am. So this happened in March 2017. I don't know what you guys were doing in March of 2017, but I was angry. As you might remember, there was a lot of hyper-partisan politics happening. I was spending more time than I'd like to admit fighting with strangers on the internet. And I happened to be on Facebook one day and I saw this disgusting meme on a friend of a friend's page. So if you look at the meme, it says, in a sexual species, there are two sexes, male and female. 99.93% of humans have XX or XY sex chromosomes. The rest is mutation. Mutations in red is all scary. Being one sex and thinking you're the other is a psychological disorder, and mandating a widespread enabling of a psychological disorder is sociopathy. And before I even go into my response to this, I just think this meme is interesting because just specifically the word mutation there in red, I feel like, they're trying to say something here, like mutation, like it's a freakish mutate, you're mutant. But the thing that's really interesting to me about that word is that, if you think about the scientific meaning of the word mutation, it's a change in DNA. And actually the disease that's caused most often by mutation is cancer. So when I was looking at this meme later on after I'd gone viral, I was thinking about that. I was like, no one would ever speak to a cancer survivor using language that was like this, you know what I mean? And so it's just really interesting to me that word mutation. Okay, anyway, so I saw this meme, it was 2017, I was mad. So I responded like this. I just commented on this transphobic post that was all like, in a sexual species, females have two X chromosomes and males have an X and a Y. I'm not a bigot, it's just science. I'm a science teacher, so I responded with this. First of all, in a sexual species, you can have females be XX and males be X in some insects. You can have females be ZW and males be ZZ in birds. You can have females be females because they developed in a warm environment, and males be males because they developed in a cool environment, reptiles. You can have females be females because they lost a penis sword fighting contest, some flatworms. You can have males be males because they were born female but changed sexes because the only male in their group died, parrotfish and clownfish. You can have males look and act like females because they're trying to get close enough to actual females to mate with them, cuttlefish, bluefish, other bluegills, others. You can be one of thousands of sexes, slime mold, some mushrooms. Oh, did you mean humans? Okay then. You can be male because you were born female, but you have 5 alpha reductase deficiency and you grew a penis at age 12. You can be female because you have an X and a Y chromosome, but you are insensitive to androgens, and so you have a female body. You can be female because you have an X and a Y chromosome, but your Y is missing your SRY gene, and you have a female body. You can be male because you have 2 X chromosomes, but one of your X's has an SRY gene, and you have a male body. You can be male because you have 2 X chromosomes, but also a Y. You can be a female because you have only one X chromosome at all. And you can be male because you have 2 X chromosomes, but your heart and brain are male, and vice effing versa. Don't use science to justify your bigotry. The world is way too weird for that shit. So, so I put that, I posted that on my personal Facebook page, and a few people asked me to make it viewable to the public because they wanted to share it. And I think I went to sleep and it had been shared like 110 times or something. And I was joking, oh, I'm going viral. And then I woke up and it had been shared like thousands of times. And I was like, oh my God, it really went viral. The reaction count, I popped back in because of this talk. And the reaction count as of a few days ago was 62,000 responses or likes or reactions, I guess. 7.6 thousand comments and 38,000 shares. But that was just for my personal Facebook page. As I'll discuss, it went viral other places as well. So this led to an extremely weird weekend. I was kind of famous for like 3 days. Celebrities, India Moore, Mark Ruffalo, Neil Gaiman, Mara Wilson, Patton Oswalt, Nick Offerman, Ashton Kutcher, and Dan Savage all liked, shared, or commented on the post. This was actually one of my favorite things that happened. I put friend Phelps as a joke there. I became Facebook friends and am still Facebook friends to this day with a personal hero who is Nathan Phelps, son of the infamous Fred. Does anyone know who Fred Phelps is? Does everyone know who Fred Phelps was?
Definitely.
Okay, so maybe for folks who don't know, Fred Phelps was the absolute hateful bigot who ran the Westboro Baptist Church and the website GodHatesFags.com until his death a few years back. And Nathan Phelps is his son, and he escaped from his abusive, hateful father when he was 18 and never looked back. And so he messaged me, and he's like, I do have to admit that my dad is Fred Phelps. I was like, are you kidding me? You're amazing. So I was really excited about that. A romance novelist, Lauren Billing-Lures, who is one of the she and a friend have the pseudonym together, Christina Lauren, and they write romance novels. She shared my post on Twitter, so I actually went viral on Twitter, even though I was not on Twitter. I began to get interview requests from all sorts of media, and other newspapers were printing the story without contacting me, so it was really weird because I was like getting these stories. I was like, I've never even heard of this paper. And the most amazing thing that happened, honestly, was the moms. So I had a few mothers of trans kids reach out to me, and part of this, like, I'm not a very public like, I'm not somebody who's ever like, okay, if people are like, would you rather be rich or famous? I'm like, rich, obviously. I don't know why anyone would choose famous. So it was a little uncomfortable for me. It was really strange, but the moms of trans kids just made everything worth it. And one thing that will stick in my heart forever is this mom reached out to me and she said, my kid is trans and I love them and I always accepted them, but in my heart, like, I still thought it wasn't natural. I still thought, I love them. This is my kid. But I thought, they have like something that's unnatural going on. And she said that my post changed her mind. And that just like, oh my gosh, I'm getting chills just saying it now. And then, whoops, my job. I had to contact them and be like, this is happening. And they called me and I was like, oh my gosh, how is this meeting gonna go? And my principal was really supportive, but they were like, you have to remember your teacher. If you just hadn't said the word shit. So that was it. They were fine, but I shouldn't have cursed. So that was the reaction there. Obviously, 2017 was a while ago. Since 2017, my wife and I had two beautiful children. I have continued my path as a passionate educator. I'm actually working right now to move out of the classroom and into curriculum design. That was a totally separate talk. I actually moved from New York to South Dakota, so I was going to say, like, El Paso Atheists, way to stick strong in the state. Not really supportive of you. To be honest with you, I really don't think about going viral very much. It was, something that happened in my life for sure, and it's cool, but I honestly don't think about it all that much. But I do remain a passionate ally to trans folks. I have trans family, trans friends, and so when you gave me the opportunity to speak, and I had thought about it a little bit, I just felt that I had to. So that is why I'm here.
Thank you.
All right. Yeah, you're so welcome. You really are. Okay, so before we go any further, I want to talk about just a couple of terms here. And before I even talk about the terms, just because it's an excuse to tell this hilarious story, it says, don't mix up your Amy's. And that's a personal story from a few years ago. It's so funny. So I have a sister named Amy, and my wife and I have a friend named Amy. And my sister named Amy is super straight and, absolutely this amazing ally, this bold, loud person. But yeah, just really straight. And our friend Amy is a lesbian. And she was applying for a job at an LGBTQ center. And our friend Amy reached out to my wife, who was in the social work world for a long time. And she's like, hey, listen, I know I'm gay, but I'm applying to this, LGBTQ center, and I just don't want to make like a dumb mistake. Can you just like help me? Just give me like a quick 101 of like the most PC terms and just help me out. And so my wife was like, yeah, sure. FYI, she makes this list of like sort of terms to use, terms not to use, and then emails it immediately to my sister Amy. And it was so hilarious because my sister Amy, like, she is a loud, bold person, and I get this phone call from her, and I pick up the phone, and she's like, Grace, I just don't know what I said to Melinda, but I'm so sorry. It was really funny. Okay, so that being said, just some terms that I might use today, or you might see elsewhere in life. AFAB, AFAB, just simply means assigned female at birth. AMAB is assigned male at birth. Intersex describes bodies that are outside of the male-female binary, either from birth or sometimes people discover it later on. Transgender, an umbrella term for persons whose gender identity, gender expression, or behavior does not conform to that typically associated with the sex which they were assigned at birth. And cisgender is just the opposite. The term for persons whose gender identity, gender expression, or behavior does conform to that typically associated with the sex to which they were assigned at birth. So what does that mean, assigned at birth? So this is a sort of a tongue-in-cheek phallometer from the Intersex Society of North America. But the standards here are true to medical standards. So if they're looking at a baby and they're looking at the clitoris or penis, the phallus, if that is under 3/8 of an inch, it's a girl. And if it's over an inch, it's a boy. And if it's somewhere in the middle, then that person would be recognized as intersex right away. We'll talk about it. There are intersex conditions where you wouldn't be able to tell from the external genitalia. But in the past, babies with a phallus between those measurements have often been brought to surgery right away. And I'm not going to get into this because it's not necessarily within the scope of this talk, but intersex community is, for obvious reasons, like maybe like leave the baby's genitals alone. Anyway, so that being said, that's what assigned means. Okay, so our friend Elon Musk here, you may have heard or people talking about, is cisgender a slur? I am cisgender myself, and no, it is not. In fact, it's actually one of my favorite terms ever because it's actually a hilarious, super intelligent, organic chemistry joke. I'm not kidding. This is where the term comes from. Okay, so in organic chemistry, you can have different isomers of a molecule, and that just means different shapes. And if the isomer is 6, that means that the molecules are on the same side. So like the hydrogens are on the same side in this example. And if the isomer is trans, then they're on the opposite side. So cis means on the same side, trans means on the opposite side. Now, trans was a term before, it didn't have anything to do with organic chemistry. That was just the term. But I don't know who it was, but whoever it was, I'm like, give you a pat on the back because it's hilarious. When they were coming up with the opposite, they used this organic chemistry knowledge to make the word cisgender. So I'm like, no, it's not a slur. It's super smart and hilarious. So there you go. All right. So I did say that the term transgender was an umbrella term. And so these are some terms that could fall under transgender. If a person identifies as any of these, they'll likely consider themselves to be trans. So there's kind of a trans man, trans woman, trans. So that would be like kind of binary. Like I was assigned female at birth, but I'm a man. So that would be like, But there's also a number of folks who don't feel like, like I don't feel like I was the gender I was assigned at birth, but I don't necessarily feel like I'm the other, in the binary system. And there's plenty of terms here. So you can see some here, and I'm sure that's an incomplete list. In fact, I'm positive it is. So what I was going to say when I got to this slide is just, basically Google's your best friend. And if you don't know a term, that's fine. Just be respectful, fairly simple to do. So, okay. So why am I here today? The El Paso Atheists invited me to speak after a member conflict. Specifically, members were divided on the issue of whether or not trans women should be allowed to participate in women's sports. Okay, so I think when people start to think about this issue, or kind of trans issues in general, one thing that kind of comes up is what causes someone to be trans? Is it genetic? Is it environmental? Is it a wacky fad? The truth is, as a science enthusiast, I would love to have a firm answer, but the truth is we don't know. The exact cause of being transgender is unknown. It may be caused by genes, fetal environment, sex hormone metabolism, difference in the brain structure, or a combination of all of these. More research needed kind of thing. One question that I've gotten before is, if being trans is genetic or biological, then why are the number of trans folks increasing? So if you're looking at this slide, the graph on the left is simply the number of people referred to a Dutch gender clinic. I really tried. I couldn't find the specific name of the clinic. The one on the right is simply, it's not specific to trans, it's LGBT identification. But you can see that in each generation, it's increasing a lot. And by year, it's increasing a lot. We just love Gen Z there. Anyway, so the question is, okay, so why is this happening? To me, and I'm not the only person who's noticed this, it reminds me a lot of the history of left-handedness. And in fact, this tweet was, like a little bit old by now, but it stuck in my heart so much that I actually Googled it from the last sentence when I was making this presentation. So this guy named Ben Phillips, I don't know who he is, he tweeted, "We used to correct kids who were left-handed through violence, shame, or guidance on how to be right-handed. And so there were very few left-handers. Then we stopped, and with no shaming, there was a seeming rapid rise, then a plateau." This is a tweet about trans kids. So, I just thought that was so amazing and apropos. I want to talk a little bit more about left-handedness because I just do think that if you struggle with trans issues, I think it's such an important connection. So to start with, if you're wondering left-handed, when we're left-handed, who cares about being left-handed? The answer is most of humans for most of history actually cared a lot about this. So until recently in Japan, you could divorce your spouse simply for being left-handed. In Islamic cultures, being left-handed was considered unclean. In medieval Europe, being left-handed could actually mean that you were a witch, so it could get you burned at the stake. It was considered satanic to be left-handed. And I once read this thing where somebody was like, the most bizarre thing about that, you could literally be killed for it, and people didn't even know how to write. So it was like, how are you using farm tools? It's what was getting these people killed. And very often, up until quite recent history, left-handed children were forced to use their right hand no matter what. And the fact is, most machinery to this day is not built for lefties. So they still have a shorter lifespan to this day, due in part to machinery accidents that wouldn't have happened if they'd had proper machines. Going back to the last bullet point here, 2 of my 4 grandparents actually were left-handed and were forced to use their right hand. I'm going to talk about my grandmother because her situation is especially stark. So my grandmother was named Ida Helverson, and she was forced into right-handedness. But this was even more disturbing than usual than forcing a general left-handed person to use their right hand, because Ida's right hand was paralyzed. She'd had polio when she was a baby, and so her right hand was completely useless. And so she went to school. You can imagine this little girl, 5, 6 years old, and she tried to write with her left hand, and her hand was beaten with a ruler, and she came home with a bloody, bruised hand. And she was sobbing. She had no idea what she was going to do because her right hand was paralyzed. And so what she actually had to do, with the help of her mother, they kind of MacGyvered these dresses with these huge bell sleeves so that she could, and I don't know if you guys can see me, if you can just see the presentation, but basically what she had to do was in her paralyzed right hand, she would place her pencil or her pen, and then with her non-paralyzed left hand underneath the bell of her, the bell sleeve of her dress, she would drag her paralyzed right hand across the paper. And then how this tiny little girl had to learn how to write because she was not allowed to use her only functional hand. So bringing it back to genetics, is being a lefty genetic? I'm sorry, the typing got a little bit messed up here. And I don't know if you're familiar with reading pedigree charts, but in a pedigree chart, and this is hilarious, talking about a presentation where we're discussing how like gender binary isn't necessarily the truth. In a pedigree chart, circles are females and squares are males. So you can see that I have my paternal grandfather and my maternal grandmother were both left-handed. And then my parents are both right-handed. I'm actually one of 5 biological siblings. So my oldest sister is left-handed, my brother and middle sister and myself are right-handed, and my youngest sister is right-handed. And then if you follow it down a generation, I have a nephew who's left-handed, my son is left-handed, and I have a niece who's left-handed. So there is quite a few lefties in the family, and if we think it's left-handed genetic, is being left-handed genetic, there is a good chance that Ida was left-handed genetically. But also she was left-handed environmentally, because even if she'd had the genes to be right-handed, her right hand was paralyzed. So if you come down to in the end, doesn't matter whether she had the genes to be left-handed. So I'm kind of making a joke here. Hold on, Ida, I'm waiting for the genetic test results in order to determine whether you suffered an injustice. Okay, sorry, I had a few notes here. So I think in terms of thinking about like the genetics of being trans, a lot of times people are looking for like a genetic explanation for identities that they don't find desirable, because that way they can kind of justify it to themselves. Oh, they can't help it, they were born this way. But recently my wife, I am gay, but if you didn't catch that, my wife recently said, yeah, he was like, I don't need for there to be a gay gene, you know, because she's like, I love being gay. If it were a choice, I would choose it. So, you know, I think that as we're talking about these things, most of the trans folks that I know, some family, some friends, you know, they want to be trans. Trans is beautiful. And so, you know, I think that we should just not focus so much on the cause sometimes, just because I think, and again, not always, but I do think that sometimes people are looking for the cause to kind of be like, see, they can't help it. And the fact of the matter is, you know, if you can help it or not, it doesn't change the fact that people deserve dignity. So that's that. All right. So coming back now a little bit more to the sports. There's this kind of transphobic perspective. And if you can hear my daughter crying in the background, I'm so sorry. This has been all day. All day. What's that?
We can't hear her. It's fine. Don't worry.
Oh, okay. I'm so glad. Okay. Anyway, so there's this kind of like, I was calling it the J.K. Rowling perspective, kind of like transphobia. Okay, transphobia harms trans folks, but trans folks harm cis women, you know? So I think there's lots of people who don't necessarily, you know, have anything against trans folks per se, but maybe they're like, well, I'm not trans, and I don't know any trans people, but I am a cis woman, or I know cis women, and you know, if kind of this like utilitarian least of the evils kind of thing, you know, like, all right, well, maybe I don't like that transphobia is harming this one group of people, but there's harming this other group of this bigger group of people. And so, you know, I want to discuss this a little bit because I do think this is a common perspective. And I want to suggest that this is a more true perspective, that transphobia harms trans folks and transphobia harms cis women. And I also want to add that transphobia harms intersex folks. And I do think that transphobia would like to pretend that intersex folks don't exist, because it kind of blows their perspective out of the water a little bit, right? If there's these people who are born in, you know, I'm not trying to say that trans folks aren't born trans, but if there are people who have like conditions that I can see that, okay, their genitals don't match either of these kind of archetypes, or their chromosomes don't match either of these archetypes. If that's true, which it is, then saying that genders are binary just doesn't make sense anymore, you know, so they just really like to pretend that they don't exist at all. How many intersex people are there? It really depends on how you define intersex. You know, I've read sort of sources that like say chromosomal abnormalities don't count as intersex, and so it's only 2 in 10,000 births. I'm like, I don't know. I think it kind of does, but anyway, it really depends on how you define intersex. But if you included a number of conditions, some researchers put the figure as high as 1.7% of the population. This is about the global percentage of natural redheads. And even though that figure might be disputed a little bit, I love it just personally because I think it's kind of this really funny visual, like hair color is binary, a person has light or dark hair, and a redhead is like, but I exist. They're like, who said that? You know, you don't exist, you're not my binary, so you can't exist at all. And the fact of the matter is, if it's 1 in 100, if it's 1 in 10,000, there are millions of intersex folks who do in fact exist. So maybe you haven't met any. Why, what might that be? The reason number one, and I cannot emphasize this enough, and we will be coming back to this point later today when we talk about trans folks, is that it's none of your flipping business. And reason number two is that intersex conditions are highly variable, and some people may not even know that they are intersex until they maybe try to have children, or maybe never, depending on the situation. So unfortunately, intersex athletes are affected by transphobia in sports. This is a story from 2012, but it just really stuck with me because it was so powerful. So the circumstances, Annette Nagesa, oh, sorry, I should have researched how to pronounce that correctly, but is a Ugandan medium distance runner. She is intersex, but the fact of the matter is she did not know it. She was assigned female at birth, and she identified as a cisgender woman. In 2012, a doctor from track and field's world governing body told her that she would not be allowed to compete in the London Olympics because her testosterone levels were too high. Now, she claims that he recommended that she undergo a gonadectomy. He recommended that she have her gonads removed because what her condition was that she had, external labia, but internal testes, and did not know it. Okay, what happened? She did undergo that surgery. What happened? First, she's from Uganda. You may or may not be familiar. Uganda has incredibly strict anti-LGBTQ laws. You can actually be put to death for being LGBTQ in Uganda. So she was forced to flee as a refugee. Had to leave her home. She has suffered depression, persistent headaches, and joint pain since the surgery. And the surgery was also incredibly psychologically painful for her. And she says, now I see my body as different, very, very different. I don't know how to talk about it. And it's so sad. And the thing that I want to talk about here specifically is there was nothing wrong with her body. You know, her internal testes were not diseased. They were not cancerous. There was nothing wrong with her body. In fact, her body was incredible. She was an Olympian. She had one of the most exceptional human bodies on planet Earth. But because her body didn't conform, it was subjected to violent censure. And she has, I actually did like a where is she now? And she's still suffering from these headaches and joint pain. It has been a years, at this point, decades long struggle for her because of this very unnecessary surgery when there was nothing wrong with her body. So unfortunately, she's not alone. So this is a link. Oh, is it not gonna let me? I might have to leave the presenting mode here for a second. Okay, because I did want to click on this link really quick. And I can share this if this lets me go. You know what? Okay. It's showing me that there's a link, but it's not letting me go to it. It is a link of other intersex athletes who have faced, oh my gosh, horrific genital testing, disqualification, having medals taken away and just like horrific stories through something that absolutely was not their fault. They were not cheating. They just had bodies that were not within the standard. I'm putting standard in quotes because it's literally a standard that is decided by like a board. So I'll share.
I think you can press the key control, and then click on the link, and it should open.
Okay, so if I do escape, this is like so funny. If I were in Google Slides, I'd be like, oh my gosh, I'm so comfortable with this. But I couldn't, even my nerd brother couldn't get Google Slides. It just wasn't showing some of the slides. I don't know why. Okay, so we have a list of different folks, and it does go back a number of years. One thing I did not realize when I was, before I started researching for this presentation, is that they used to literally have female tests for women's sports, and like the female athletes would have to like be inspected. Like it sounds so insane, but I mean, so I'm just gonna go ahead and drop this in the chat box here.
Okay.
Sorry for the infinity mirror here. Okay. So folks can check that out. All right. So I do want to move on. What about cisgender women? Before I talk about this, I do want to say that cisgender women should not be the focus of a discussion about trans rights, but I wanted to start here because if you found yourself with Team JK back there, like, oh, she wrote a really good book. I just think this is a good place to start because I do think that a lot of people have that idea, like, you know, transphobia hurts trans folks, but trans folks hurt cisgender women. And so I want to start here, and I want to talk a little bit about some ways that I see transphobia hurting someone like me, a cisgender woman. Okay. So the first thing I want you to think about is, what are the people who are against trans folks participating in sports saying and proposing? Transphobic folks claim that men are posing as trans women in order to win sporting competitions. Okay. Sometimes I think we have these news stories and we forget that like people are people. So whatever your gender identity is, whatever your gender expression is, I want you to ask yourself if you would give up your gender identity to win a trophy, because I would not. So I don't know about you, but I'd be like, yeah, I can actually order a trophy off of Amazon. I'm good. I'm not going to give up my gender identity for a sporting competition. And maybe I just don't sport enough. I don't know. You get back to me on that. Okay. The second thing I want us to think about is, who exactly is going to enforce a ban on trans folks participating in sports? And how will they do so? Because if you start to read back into like the history of those female tests, like I did, do you want there to be child genital inspectors? Like, you know, you can participate in Pee Wee soccer if someone looks at your genitals. Because my question is, I thought we cared about, like, people, you know, I hear these people talking about groomers. Like, do we care about groomers, or are we paying people to be child genital inspectors? Like, we just need to choose a lane. Okay. And then the other thing I just want to think about here is, what message does this controversy send to cisgender girls? Because to me, when I hear about this, I always get really annoyed. If you are a woman, the fact is the whole world is biased against you. This is a study from 2020 done globally, that almost 90% of men and women are biased against women. And a lot of this controversy about trans women in sports comes down to many people genuinely believe that men are better than women at literally everything. So I want to talk about that. What are we really saying? If someone says trans women have an unfair advantage at insert activity, the implied things that they're saying is that trans women are men. And then the second implied thing that they're saying is that men are better than women at everything. And at literally everything. And I do want to take a second because, like, I get it. You know, I live in the real world. And I do understand that like your average cisgender man is like physically built differently than your average cisgender women. They tend to be stronger. I get it, you know. But this is such a slippery slope. And misogynists will just take a sled and go down this slope at 90 miles an hour. And case in point, one sport in which trans women were banned was chess. Literally chess, okay? So I put like links, screenshots directly from this article because the author just said things I was like so much better than I could, because the chess ban clearly implies the idea that trans women might have an intellectual advantage over cisgender women. Like, hint, hint, what they're really saying is men are smarter than women. And when the chess organization was reached out to, they were like, no, of course, men and women are equally intellectually capable. But this is actually a quote here. However, in chess as a sport, other factors like physical endurance may play a role. Like, women might not be as good at sitting on a chair and moving little chess pieces. And then in the second screenshot here, it says, this argument is even more surreal when you consider that many of these trans exclusionary organizations that support these bans under the guise of protecting women's sports or standing up for women's right to fair competition are run by women. And they're essentially arguing that their idea of feminism is one in which men are smarter and physically superior to them, which seems at best, at minimum, contradictory to the very tenets of the movement. And then the author ended with, hilariously, trans women were also recently banned from the Miss Italy beauty competition. So apparently trans women are also prettier than cis women, to add to the list of things that trans women excel at. So, you know, I just think that it's like an absurd point, but it's exactly what they're saying is like, the reason that we needed to ban trans women is because trans women are men and men are better than women at virtually everything. I actually, before I move on, I did once have a man say to my face that he could beat Venus and Serena Williams at tennis if he tried, even though he didn't play tennis. So the harm to cisgender women is more than philosophical. So I just pulled some headlines here. These are all recent headlines. Debates surrounding true gender of Chinese female athletes reignited. Utah schools secretly investigated if a winning female student athlete is transgender. Adults interrupt track meet to accuse 9-year-old girl of being transgender. Texas athlete speaks out about being questioned about gender. And I just feel that transphobia becomes a cudgel to attack female excellence and a license to police gender expression. Because if you can make trans women this boogeyman, then you know, if you're a cisgender woman, you better not be too good. You better not win by too much. You better not have a pixie cut. The 9-year-old girl had a pixie cut, and that's why she was attacked by adults. And to me, it's really sad that, you know, this other group, this marginalized group, is being used to police and police cisgender women, and also to just make little girls afraid of success. The harm to transgender women is more than being excluded from sports. I think the important thing about transphobia in sports is it's not really about sports. It's really about transphobia. And anti-trans violence is skyrocketing. It's getting worse and worse. The rhetoric is insane. You know, I've seen like literal calls for genocide for trans folks. And, you know, the idea that cisgender women need to be afraid of trans people, or that trans people are harming us, when they are so much more likely to be the victim of violence, to me is so gross. So like this top headline here says transgender people are over 4 times more likely than cisgender people to be victims of violent crime. I mean, these are just like people being horrifically murdered because people think their bodies are weird. You know, it's really sad. And I want to leave it with Megan Rapinoe because, unlike myself, she is a tremendous athlete. And I was touched by her words here because she said that the U.S. has weaponized women's sports against trans people and that we're trying to legislate away people's full humanity. And I just love her quotes. I'm just going to say them in full here. So one thing she said, it's particularly frustrating when women's sports is weaponized. Oh, now we care about fairness. Now we care about women's sports. That's total bullshit. And show me all the trans people who are nefariously taking advantage of being trans in sports. It's just not happening. And then another thing she said is, she's quoting people, you're taking a real woman's place, end quote. That's the part of the argument that's extremely transphobic, she said, because a trans woman is a real woman. And finally, we're putting this all through the lens of competition and winning, but we're talking about people's lives, and that's where we have to start. So that's my presentation for you. I do have 3 ways to connect to me. I have my Evolving with Grace Facebook page. If you're a science teacher or teacher in general, I do have a Teachers Pay Teachers store. I'd love it if you follow me, and I do have an email list that I am starting as well. So that's it. That's my whole shtick. But I know that you guys maybe want to ask some questions too. So I'm going to see if I can start sharing here. There we go.
All right. Do we have some questions?
I have more of a reaction in general than a question.
Just put it close to you.
Okay. First of all, thank you so much for illustrating the diversity of conditions that can cause intermediate gender presentation. You know, in infants, there are so many different conditions with different degrees of genetic involvement, and I really just would like to stop hearing from the transphobes the idea that science is on their side. It's totally not on their side.
Oh God, you're so wrong.
I'm
so
also
wrong.
a science educator, have been at times a science educator and a science ed researcher. And when you were teaching this, I immediately knew, oh, she's not from Texas, because a teacher would lose their job in Texas for teaching that. One reason I'm not teaching anymore. But I do think that some of what you presented about sort of transphobe ideology was misrepresented and like maybe took a slice of, you know, there are a lot of diverse confusions and opinions, I think, on the right about that. I don't think, and I'm also thinking as someone who's been in contact with high school sports parents, I don't think they all think that it's trans men pretending to be women. I think they think of them as people who have an unfair advantage because they're mutants, right? As if Michael Phelps didn't have like unfairly long arms. I mean, that they don't. The categories, the binaries, have really been baked into people's brains, right? It's the biggest cultural change we've seen in a century, I think, and it is taking a lot of older people some time to wrap their heads around it while they're being fed all this hateful bullshit, which is not about protecting women's sports or anything. But anyway, sorry, lots to say. I'll connect with you hopefully on Facebook and we'll talk some more.
Perfect. That's awesome. That's awesome.
Anybody else?
Yeah, saying what you said about Michael Phelps, I was thinking that my sister had just recently told me that there are some people who have like exceptionally long Achilles tendon who can jump exceptionally high. I was thinking about that too. When I was like, you know, people's bodies, some have just a natural advantage. So that's an interesting point. I love that you brought that up.
He produces half the amount of lactic acid of other people. So it's like, can we just take him off then?
Yeah, no one's making a meme calling him a mutant in red, but.
Yeah. That's one. Yeah.
Someone? No one? Okay.
I could say more, Monica, unless you have something.
No, we have time, I guess.
Okay, let me see. Because I do have some numbers of stuff you mentioned that we don't really know numbers for, and the ones I have are like a decade old, but they give you some idea of when you talk about like if somebody is transgender, what does that mean? If someone is intersex, how are they measuring that, right? How they're often measuring it is out of birth in hospitals, in U.S. hospitals, in how many births are parents referred to a gender specialist or a pediatric endocrinologist or some, in how many cases are the parents told, we're not sure if you have a boy or a girl, go talk to this person? And another doctor, maybe a team of doctors, right, depending on the situation. That reportedly, what I have read is that happens in about 1 in 1,500 births. And that's not even counting then all the intersex conditions that aren't visible at birth, right?
Like the athletes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I mean, their athletes come in all these situations too, right? And I know the link you had going back and looking at the transgender, there was, I'm trying to remember her name, the Spanish tennis player, Maria something. She wasn't even a transgender athlete. She just had a high testosterone level for a woman. And they tested her and they kicked her out of her sport.
Yeah.
So,
And there was this one woman just from the list here, and I was doing a lot of research, Eva Klabukowska. She had her gold medals taken away, but later she had a child. So I was like, I'm not sure what condition she had, but I was particularly confused by that one. So
the other point that I would really try to make to my students about this was that when parents do get recommended to see a pediatric endocrinologist or whoever, often the result of that meeting is surgery. And those surgeries violate every ethical standard for surgery. They are not, there are like basic 3 or 4 ethical standards for surgery. There has to be informed consent, which can't be on an infant, but if they're a minor, there has to be a medical necessity. These are basically cosmetic surgeries and ruin a lot of lives. And I feel like you can put on a lot. The people who argue, it's only like 0.5% of the population or whatever. It's like being a minority doesn't mean you don't have to be right.
that's exactly what makes me crazy about the intersex thing, because people will try to be like, oh, but it's only, and I'm like, it doesn't matter if it's literally just one person, because it's like this phenomena exists. Because so you can sit here and tell me like it's more rare than I think, but it still is like a thing. So it still blows the binary on them.
I don't want to dominate the conversation, but I'll get in touch with you apart.
Thank you.
Yeah, one thing I mentioned, sorry, I don't mean to harp on this, but one thing I mentioned when people were, because, obviously there was a lot of conversation. So when I had originally gone viral, one of the things I heard a lot is, these are incredibly rare. And, as someone who studied the philosophy of science, I was thinking back to, and Karl Popper, who's a scientific philosopher, he had this thing about you can never have an absolute in science, because there could be a black swan. So I can't say that all swans are white, because there could be millions and millions and millions and millions of white swans. But if there's one black one, even one, then I'm wrong. And so I was like, there's literally millions of intersex folks, and you're trying to say, well, they're not that common. So I'm like, no, they exist. They're the black swan. Too bad you're wrong. So, anyway, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, I don't have any questions. Actually, I really like your presentation. I found it very, thank you, and round of applause to her. I really found it very educated, and I really enjoyed talking with you. It seems like nobody else has any questions, so I'll be in touch with you over email if that's okay. I'll also look at you on Facebook, and then and stay in touch with you, because I still have to give you some true Venmo,
Perfect. And also,
where are you, I'm sorry, I came late, but where are you located now?
So I just very recently in June moved from, I was living in the Hudson Valley for over 10 years, and my wife and I, for a ton of reasons, mainly having to do with our kids, moved back to my home state, which is South Dakota. So I'm in South Dakota. So yeah, with you guys in the fight there.
Yeah. So let me just finish the live. I'm just gonna, but